The rain tapped against the tall glass windows of the corporate tower. The kind of steady drizzle that made the city look like it was wrapped in a sheet of gray. Inside, the world was polished and precise, every desk aligned, every file stacked perfectly, every surface spotless. That perfection was partly because of Eli, the janitor. Quiet, middle-aged, and always carrying a folded cloth in his pocket. He moved through the building like he was invisible. No one really noticed him. Except when they did, and it was usually to complain. On this particular evening, as the office staff was clearing out, the CEO, Margaret Collins, stayed behind. Known for her icy demeanor and her obsession with discipline, Margaret didn't tolerate anything that looked like wasted time. She believed in efficiency, in results, in absolute focus. Her young son, Daniel, sat quietly in the corner of her office, his small hands folded on his lap, his gaze downward. He rarely spoke, barely whispered a word since his father had passed away a year ago. Margaret had brought him to work more often lately, perhaps hoping he would learn strength from watching her. But in truth, he sat in silence, like a shadow beside her desk. That's when it happened. As Eli made his usual rounds, he paused outside her office door, carrying a piece of discarded paper. Instead of tossing it away, he folded it with patient fingers. His hands moved as though they'd done this 1,000 times. Delicate creases, small adjustments, shaping something out of nothing. In a few minutes, the paper had transformed into a small origami bird. He held it carefully, as though it was fragile glass, before setting it gently on the table outside her door. Margaret saw him through the glass panel. Her face tightened. In her eyes, this wasn't art. This was laziness. She stepped out, her heels striking sharply against the marble floor. "Eli," she said, her voice cold and firm, "this is not a playground. I don't pay you to fold scraps of paper. I pay you to clean." Eli looked up, startled, but he didn't argue. He simply gave a faint nod, the kind that said he'd heard these kinds of words all his life. Before he could explain, she continued, "You're fired. Collect your things and leave immediately." The bird sat between them, small and weightless, yet somehow heavy with meaning. Eli bowed his head, whispered a quiet, "Yes, ma'am," and began walking away, the paper bird still resting on the table. Inside the office, Daniel's eyes had lifted for the first time in days. He stood, walked toward the doorway, and picked up the origami bird. His small fingers turned it gently, tracing the folds as though he understood every crease. His lips trembled, and then, for the first time in months, he whispered a word, "Eli." Margaret froze. She turned sharply, her heart thudding. "What did you say?" she asked, her voice breaking its usual edge. Her son clutched the bird tightly. "Eli," he repeated, louder this time, his voice fragile but clear. Margaret's chest tightened. Her son hadn't spoken since the funeral, not a single word. Doctors had called it selective mutism born from grief. No therapy, no coaxing had worked. And now, this single word, the janitor's name, had broken his silence. She spun around, her heels echoing like thunder as she hurried down the hall. Eli was nearly at the door, his cap pulled low, his bag over his shoulder. "Wet." Margaret called, her tone different now, pleading, almost desperate. Eli paused, surprised. She walked closer, her usual authority slipping into something vulnerable. "My son," he spoke. "He said your name." Eli blinked, clearly startled. Slowly, he glanced toward Daniel, who was still standing in the office doorway, clutching the bird. Their eyes met. Child and janitor. And something unspoken passed between them. Margaret's breath caught. She didn't understand, but she knew she couldn't let this man go. "Please," she whispered, her voice trembling in a way her employees would never believe. "Don't leave." Eli set his bag down slowly. His rough, calloused hands fidgeted with the strap before he finally spoke, his voice gentle. "Origami was how I helped my daughter through silence. Sometimes words are too heavy, but shapes they carry what we can't say." The Daniel walked toward him, step by step, and without hesitation, handed him the bird. For the first time in so long, Margaret saw her son's eyes shining, not empty, not broken, but alive. In that moment, Margaret realized something painful. She had spent so much energy building an empire of order and control, that she had forgotten how fragile the human heart was. She had been blind to the small miracles that could bring healing. Not balance sheets, not discipline, but something as simple as a folded bird. That night, the rain outside seemed softer. The janitor stayed, not as just a worker, but as someone who had unknowingly held the key to unlocking her son's silence. And Margaret, the CEO who once believed in perfection above all else, learned that sometimes the most valuable things come from the people we least expect, and from the smallest of gestures. Eli didn't just keep his job. He became part of their story, a bridge between silence and words, between grief and hope. And for Daniel, the first word he spoke wasn't just a name. It was the beginning of finding his voice again.